So here we are, Year 9, Lesson 2. Now, hopefully you enjoyed last week's lesson. Hopefully I gave you some food for thought and you looked at poetry perhaps in a way that you might not have done today. So what are we doing this week? Well, this week we're asking ourselves this question. Why power and conflict? So the reason that those are the two themes that we're kind of looking at in particular, not exclusively, but in particular when we look at poetry this term, um, is because when you study poetry at GCSE level, you're going to look at poems from an anthology called Power and Conflict. So the selection of poems that you look at are all about or contain the theme of, or in some way link to power and conflict, and all of them link to those two themes in differing ways, in stronger or in slightly more abstract ways, but they all do. And so a kind of grasp of these themes is helpful when we do look at those poems. So I'm going to go through what you're going to need this week. So you're going to need a pen or a pencil and some paper. You don't need to hand the paper in. The paper is for you to write things down that help you think and help you access the other parts of the lesson. You will need the Google Answer Sheet open in another tab. You will need that open in another tab or on another device because you'll need to jump from the video to the answer sheet. You'll need to bring some of your ideas from last week, and you need to be ready to think about the world around you. I'm really conscious that we're in a very strange insular time in our lives where most of our worlds are now whatever rooms we have uh, in our houses or in our flats. And it's important for us to not forget that there is a wider world out there, and there will be. There will continue to be a wider world out there. Um, so I think it's important that we do try and get our minds out of just our bedrooms for the next period of time. Anyway, so we're going to look at why those themes are relevant, but we're also going to look at why they're worth being chosen. So obviously, the people who've kind of sat down and gone, oh, what should they do for their GCSEs? Oh, let's do power and conflict. So they've obviously sat down and made that decision for a good reason. We're going to have a look at that. We're going to think, why are those particular themes relevant? Why have they been chosen? Um, so here's a kind of breakdown of the steps of what this lesson is going to be. So we're going to start by defining what power and conflict are for you and what they can be. Then we're going to recognize words and imagery about power and conflict and what the emotional effect of them is. We're going to create our own images of power and conflict. And then we're going to decide and argue why these images appear in poetry. So we're going to define, recognize, create, and then decide and argue. So on your sheet of paper, not on your Google form, on your sheet of paper, on your blank sheet of paper, what I'd like you to start by doing is writing down all the words, so places, names, adjectives, verbs that you associate with power and conflict. I'd like you to take a good 10 minutes to do that. And to be honest with you, you can spend longer if you like, but I want you to spend at least 10 minutes because there's quite a lot to think about there. There's quite a lot to process. There's quite a lot to go through. I have done it. I'm going to share my answers in a moment with you. But I'm not right. No one's right. No one's wrong. And I've gone for very general terms and very general words because I'm trying to match as many of you as possible. So I haven't been hugely specific in mind. So just just think for yourselves for 10 minutes at least about what those two words could mean and what those two words could contain. So once you've done that, and you can pause the video to do that, once you've done that, we'll now move on and we'll look at the words that I came up with. So just take a couple of minutes. You can pause the video. Just take a couple of minutes to look at the words that I've come up with there. So Yeah, so these are the words that I came up with in the 10 minutes that I sat down and thought about it. Apologies for the loud bang there. That was my wife and daughter going outside. So I think the sort of the big ones that really sort of I surprised myself by coming up with really were conflict. Immediately after War and Peace, I got to family and friendship because I suddenly thought, where do most people's conflicts occur? And I was like, that's actually where most of their conflicts occur, with their family or their friends. And I think, most of us can testify that at school we've had some kind of conflict with a friend or a teacher or someone in another year, or we've been in conflict with our family about things. Um, and the other one was this idea of power. I was thinking about the power of nature and the natural world. Um, and then that made me think about disease, about the power of this disease that exists in our world at the moment. Um, how powerful that is. It's preventing us from going to places. It's it's kind of it closed down society almost for a section of time. That is a powerful thing. It's a lot more powerful than some people think they are. I was pretty, I suddenly thought, yeah, that is a lot of power there. So hopefully you've come up with some other interesting and kind of slightly more abstract and out there thoughts, or maybe you've kind of gone, do you know what, that was actually really hard, and you've only written down 2 or 3 things in your 10 minutes. That's also possible. It is difficult to quantify these things, but that's why we're going to now try and define them for ourselves. So what I've got here is uh, a little excerpt from the dictionary definition of what power is. This is what the dictionary defines power as: the ability to control people and events. Um, so, what I want you to do is turn to your Google answer sheet and write down a new definition, your own definition for this word, your own words, your own ideas. What do you think this word means? There's the dictionary definition there. Think about what some of those other things that you came up with were and whether or not that changes the definition for you. Okay, so hopefully you've done that. You've unpaused the video. So I'd like you to now do exactly the same thing for conflict. So here's the definition of conflict: an active disagreement between people with opposing principles. So go to your Google answer sheet, write down your definition for this. So pause the video and do that now. Okay, so kind of putting these things together, there's a section on your Google sheet that you will see now where you have to say whether or not you agree with statements and why you agree with them. And there's also a few statements, and I want you to rank those in order. So I'm going to take some time now. I'm not going to put a limit on it at all, but take some time to make sure that you've really thought about those answers. So pause the video and fill out that next section of the Google sheet. Okay, so moving on. So that was our kind of looking at definition. Um, when I was making this lesson, uh, all of this stuff in America was kicking off the George Floyd incident, and it made me realise that actually the relevance of these themes is not something I really need to explain to you. We can talk about why we might choose them and why we might write about them. So I'm going to talk about why it's relevant to write poetry in their relation to poetry. But the ideas of power and conflict today, I really feel like you turn on the news and there's nowhere else to go. So I will reference that first image, that Killer Mike image later on, an incredibly moving speech that he made. And there's some graffiti there of George Floyd. But I just thought this is quite, you know, what we're looking at is utterly, utterly relevant. We're looking at that idea of communicating these themes and how we do that, and why choose poetry to do that. So, keeping with that idea of relevance, what we're really struggling with at the moment is kind of articulating, is explaining how we feel about those things. Um, and so we can see from all the different people making speeches and what they're saying is that there is a need to express these things very clearly. But we can also see that it's difficult to articulate those things. Might be one reason why people are turning to poetry. But I just want you to remember that it is difficult to articulate these things. So although we need to try and be as clear as we can, and people will try and be as clear as they can, they will try and say what they think. It's important to remember it is difficult to do that. So we should be sympathetic towards each other and also sympathetic towards ourselves if we can't quite articulate what we're feeling. Don't give yourself a hard time if you can't put how you're feeling into words. So we're going to look at a little part of a little extract from a poem by this woman here called Assata Shakur. So I'll say now, pause the video to just read about her before I talk about her a little bit more. So pause the video now. Okay, so as it says there, her poetry was used by Drake in response to the murder of George Floyd, and I didn't really know too much about this woman. So I saw that Drake had shared this poem, and I thought, well, that's some incredibly powerful poetry there. And then I investigated her a little bit more, and my goodness, what an incredibly confusing moral maze her life is. What a very difficult thing to work out. She is held up in some quarters as an absolute hero, as a freedom fighter. In other quarters, she's held up as a murderer. She was convicted of the murder of a police officer. She has admitted to being involved in armed robberies. She has been involved in very violent acts, but she has always been an advocate for civil rights. She's currently living in Cuba, where she has political asylum. She's still wanted by the FBI with a $2 million reward. I think that's incredible. She's also Tupac's godmother, which I just think is, I had no idea. But there you are. So she's a very interesting and divisive figure. And it's very difficult to wade through all the information about her online and come to a clear and just conclusion. To be completely honest with you, I'm not in a position to really be able to tell you more than that. So if you're interested and you want to find out more about her, then go online and do so. But remember to think about where those sources are that you're getting that information from. So let's have a look at the poetry now. So this is from a poem called Affirmation by Assata Shakur. So this is a little section, just a little part of a stanza here. Now I've put in green down the bottom. These images reflect Assata Shakur's view of the world and the sort of life that she has led. Now that's what I'm saying about this, and you're going to sit there, well, oi Randall, you absolute egg man, what are you talking about? How have you got there, you absolute plum? So I'm going to talk you through how I've got to that kind of conclusion about this. So sort of ignore that green bit for now, and we'll see how we get there. So the first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to talk about that kind of image of the sweat of love, and I'm going to talk about the image of the fire of truth. So I believe in living, I believe in birth. Those two things, we can understand the imagery there. I believe in living. I think it's important. I believe in birth, the idea of something starting. I believe in the sweat of love, though, and the fire of truth. So what does that mean, the sweat of love? Well, sweat implies hard work, doesn't it? So it's the idea that love requires conflict and difficulty to function. The poet is saying that she believes in the sweat of love. She thinks it's positive, it works. It's not a typical image of love. It's not something that you would normally see when someone's talking about love. The idea of something being hard work and conflict and difficulty and and tough to complete. And in a way, the same thing for truth. I put here, the image of fire suggests that truth can destroy things and is difficult to control. Fire is also warm and necessary for life to continue, suggesting that truth has good and bad sides. So we can see there then that fire and truth are not necessarily things you would always put next to each other, because fire destroys things, it burns things down. What's also interesting, you think about when these words were written, was a long time before the protests that we've got going on, but they've been similar protests. A friend of mine works for a publishing company, publishes history textbooks, and he put a message online saying how sad he found it that he's been publishing these history textbooks for years, and he just sees the same things happening over and over again. It made me think about this actually, this idea of things being repeated. Um, but that's how I ended up at this idea that these images reflect the view of the world and the sort of life this person has led. So we can see here this person expressing themselves through their poetry, and they are expressing conflict, and they are expressing a kind of a complicated relationship with power as well. So good look at someone a little bit different now. This is Inez Mitchell. I think I'm pronouncing her name correctly. I'll just, you pause the video now to have a read through about her. So so she's a singer-songwriter, and she wrote this. I'm not sure whether the musical or the album came first, but she wrote this album Hadestown, which has become an incredibly popular musical, and all of her music is used in it. And there's one particular song that really stands out. It's an incredibly powerful song. So we'll have a little look at that now. So here it is. It's from Why We Build the Wall. Now, there there are the lines. So just pause the video now and read through everything that I've put up there. So I've started off by talking about the rhetorical question, making us ask that question. I always think that's one of the most powerful things with rhetorical questions is, someone getting up and giving a speech or reading something or reading a book or reading a poem, and unless you're explicitly asked the question, you just accept the answer from the author or the narrator, don't you? But if someone actually asks the question first, you're suddenly going, oh, I don't know. Oh, I've got to think about that. And I think that's incredibly powerful opening. And again, there's this vagueness with the enemy. It's sort of the enemy is everybody else. It's other than us. It's us and them, isn't it? And the repetition of build the wall. It's obviously no surprise where she got the inspiration for this from. But I think it's a reflection of the repetition that different leaders have with different slogans. Um, sort of like all the way back to kind of Tony Blair having his slogans, repeating his things over and over again, and then David Cameron had them, and Boris Johnson had "Get Brexit Done." Different politicians, Trump, "Build the Wall," Obama, "Yes, we can." Politicians have these kind of slogans, and I think the repetition here of this one shows us that that's obviously something that the writer wants to be prevalent in their work, and the fact that these things are so relevant and so rooted in what's happening today does suggest to us that this song might be allegorical. Now, I've included a song because last week we were looking at lyrics and we were talking about how that's essentially poetry, and so I feel like it's important to still include that, and still think about that as a form. So we're going to look at another poet now, and I'm going to kind of get you to do this process for yourself. So let's just start by looking at the poet. So pause the video now and read through. Okay, apart from the fact that I have just spotted that I've typed "received" incorrectly, which is causing me great mental, emotional, and physical pain. This is Maya Angelou. She was an incredible woman. She was a dancer, a singer, an actress, a composer, a poet, an essay writer, an activist. I mean, working with Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Um, just incredible, just an incredible woman. But we're going to have a look at a little section of a poem called "Still I Rise." So there's the section of the poem. You can read that through for yourselves. I'll get you to pause the video in a second. What I want you to do is to go to the Google Form answer sheet, write down your responses to the questions that I've underlined. Oh, hang on, is that underlining come up? There we go. There we go. Sorry. The underlining, those are the words and the lines that I've underlined. So they're up there. And I want you to choose a favourite line from the other two texts. So you might have to go back in the video to look at those and then answer the question about it. So pause the video now, go to the Google form, complete that section. Okay, so hopefully you've done that now, and that's made you think a little bit more. So let's just go through what we've done so far. So we began by defining what power and conflict are for us and what they can be. So we kind of wrote that list of all those different things that they could be, and we wrote down our own definitions. So we've done that. Good. So we've now begun to recognize words, imagery about power and conflict, but also to think about what the emotional effect of those is. And also we've looked at some wide-ranging people, um, who've had different lives and done different things, and they all have a different emotional kind of relationship with power and conflict. So we've done that. So now we're moving on to creating our own images of what power and conflict are. So here's what I want you to do. This is a poem. That's the whole poem there. What I have done is I've taken out some of the words. I think I've taken out the title and 8 words. So what I want you to do is to go to your Google Form answer sheet and take 20 minutes. And again, if it takes you longer, it takes you longer. That's fine. Don't panic. But I'd like you to take the time to really do this, kind of sensitively. I want you to fill in those gaps. So the first one at the top is the title. Don't worry about getting it right. This isn't about getting it right. It's about you creating your own images of power and conflict. So you kind of creating your own idea of what those things are and how those things can be expressed. Don't try and guess what the original words were. Just come up with your own ideas. So pause the video now and take 20 minutes to do that. Okay, so let's have a look at what the words actually are. So here we go. It's called I Too by a poet called Langston Hughes. So pause the video now to read this poem through. Okay, so I have underlined something there and put a little arrow next to it, that word am. So I just want to talk a little bit about this thing called foregrounding. So if you look at the first line of the poem under the words I too, the first line is I too sing America. The last line is I too am America. Now, foregrounding is where a poet or an author really manages to, well, put something in the foreground, to push something to the front. It's almost like underlining, circling, highlighting a particular word, but in an emotional or structural way so that the reader focuses in on that word. What Langston Hughes has done is, because he's begun with this kind of bold, individual, single line stanza, we remember that. I too sing America. That sticks in our heads because that was the opening. So when we get to the end and it says I too am America, that change, that sort of deviation from the original word, foregrounds this one. I too am America. He's saying it's not just a question of me existing in America, it's that I am America. What I'd like you to do now is to go back to your Google Form answer sheet, and you'll see that there are some questions about your response compared to Langston Hughes's original words and original thought. And I just want you to think about the different emotional effect of what those were. If that means you have to share your ideas with a family member to see what they think and how they responded to it, then please do that. I think that would be a really good thing to do. But just take some time now to answer those questions. So pause the video now and answer those questions. Okay, moving on. So the next step on that Google form is to write your own 2 lines of poetry inspired by the imagery and words you have read. So we've looked at those 3 different extracts, the 2 of which I talked through, and one of which is Maya Angelou one, which you've come up with your own ideas for. Then we've looked at Langston Hughes, and we've looked at creating our own images just by filling in the gaps in somebody else's poem. And now I want you to just spend some time writing 2 lines of poetry. Now, it doesn't really need to be very long. 2 lines of poetry shouldn't be an intimidating thing. It could be 2 words. It could be 2 sentences. You might decide that you want to kind of do your own version of Langston Hughes, and actually the 2 of his lines with your words in instead are going to be what you're going to choose. So if it means you have to skip back through the video to look at the other texts, then do that. but just spend some time now writing your own 2 lines of poetry in the Google form. Pause the video now. Okay, fantastic. So let's move on. So we have defined what power and conflict are for us. We've recognized words and imagery, and now we've created our own images of what power and conflict are. So now we're into the deciding and arguing why these images appear in poetry in the first place. So there's a statement on your Google form, and I want you to go back to that now, and I want you to respond to that statement. And then we're going to talk a little bit now. We're going to talk a little bit after you've done that. We're going to talk about what your kind of big task this week is, what your kind of going away, doing a creative task is. Because I think really, in order to accurately do this, we do need to talk about the events in the world at the moment. So just pause the video and go to your Google form and respond to that statement. So your big task this week. Now, you've got an option here. I really don't mind which one you do. It's entirely up to you, but here are your 3 options. Just pause the video for a moment now and read through what they are. So, number 1, writing a poem based on the ideas or images, or even your 2 lines. So there's 2 lines that you just wrote. Maybe you could use those as your starting point for a poem. But I want it to be a response to something, one of the things that have been in the other poems, something you've seen in the news. It's a response. The second option is to write an article for the student newsletter on one of the poets we've looked at in this lesson. So all of these are kind of up for going into the student newsletter if you want to. Obviously, I'll ask for permission before I put them in there, but this one specifically, looking at one of the poets that we've looked at, finding out a little bit more about them, explaining who they are. If you want to find another poet as well, and that's absolutely fine, of course, I would recommend for number 2 or some inspiration for number 1 going to this website here, the poetryfoundation.org. It sounds incredibly sad, but this is absolutely one of my favourite websites. They have a poem of the day, as you can see on the left-hand side. It's an incredibly inspiring website to go to. If you're ever just feeling like you just need a little bit something a little bit different, then I would go here and just read some poetry. It really does. It really does make you feel a lot better. Anyway, so that's what I'd recommend for number 2. And number 3. So I want you to take one of the poems we've looked at today, and I want you to turn it into a speech. I want you to imagine you're giving a speech to protesters in America at the moment. Now, I've put here, if you want to, you can watch the Killer Mike speech in Atlanta. So what I would say is there is some offensive language in it, largely him quoting other people. It's an incredibly inspiring speech, incredibly inspiring. There is, it is quite upsetting. He is very upset in it, very emotional, but it is an incredible example of somebody using imagery to articulate their emotional response to something. And I think that it would be inspiring for you in terms of the understanding the importance of words and the importance of our choice of them in terms of what we're doing at the moment in terms of looking at the power of those things. So that's your task this week, to do one of those things. Hopefully this was helpful. Again, please give us feedback. Always looking to improve this, and we're sort of planning this this new scheme for you, specifically designed for you to be doing at home like this. So if things could be more helpful, if things could be different, then let us know. Or if things are really good, or you go, oh, I liked it when you did that, do more of that, please. Then again, let us know, and you'll get more of it. So I hope you had a good time going through this, and I look forward to seeing your responses. Thank you very much.